This analysis is part of my coaching portfolio and serves as a way for me to showcase my understanding of the game. For more information, refer to my online CV. The way that I will structure this project is that I will first go over some general information on how City Center is played, after which I will alternate between showing a team fight and then rewatching the team fight and providing insights to crucial moments. Alright, so before I go into the VOD itself, I actually wanted to take some time to kind of explain my understanding of how Oasis City Center is being played. So, what I refer to in this analysis as the jump pad area is basically the entire area down here, including the high ground area as well. Whenever I refer to the opposite of that area, I am referring to this area back here. And these are the main chokes that I'm talking about. So, now the way that this map is being played is that you kind of have this struggle, because this high ground area up here is actually incredibly advantageous. Not only does it give you control of the mega in the back here, which is super strong for flankers, but it gives you a great overview of especially this area if the enemies decide to come through the choke, and you know the frontal area of the point. However, one of the main problems is that you are not really contesting the point from up there, which means that an opponent team can go into this area opposite of the high ground area that I'm marking right now, which would allow them to capture the point without really having to deal with the high ground at all. So the players on the high ground need to make a choice. Either they keep their superior positioning and let the enemies cap, which usually isn't a great idea, or they decide to fall down in order to contest the point and take a fight. And so the way that you normally play this is that if you don't have the point, you want to go to the opposite side, okay, so this area over here, in order to force the enemies off of the high ground. And the only challenge about that is crossing this area here, because while you're in that area, before you actually make it behind the kind of jacuzzi area in the middle, you're completely exposed to the high ground, which leaves you very vulnerable. However, once you actually make it through, which can also happen if you take the long route all the way in the back, which saves you some time, then the defending team is forced to drop off. So the way that it's usually being played is that if you have the point, you do want to try and take control of this high ground area. And then when you spot the enemies trying to retake the point either via this entrance or via this entrance, that's when you want to try and drop yourself down and go for a hard engage. Now, two things that are also pretty important that I think are worth mentioning is these two small health packs over here. Now, these health packs are important because these are some of the most frequently used health packs. And the reason this is important is because since we're in a very flanker-heavy meta, with a lot of Tracer players especially, one important thing for Tracer players is to be aware of spots where low HP enemies are going to be. So in this case, since these two health packs are so popular, a Tracer player knows that as long as she has vision and control of these smaller health packs, the enemies are essentially coming to her, okay? So.
Not staying on the Zenyatta. Be sure for playing McCree here. It's a Los Angeles Valiant. They'll have Silk Threat playing Pharah, Grim Reality will be playing Tracer, and you have Kari playing the Mercy. So they're going to be running Mercy Lucio, no Zenyatta on the side of the Valiant.
The Valiant not touching the jump pad yet, as it does make a sound. It gives off a sound cue if you use it, a bouncy sound you're probably used to hearing by now. Grim Reality again, he's a backstop now. What the Valiant have been able to do is essentially corral the Gladiators into a fairly small space. They have to watch out because, again, they do fight back. Grim's looking for looks like he's looking for a Mercy here. Let's do a little bit of scouting going on from the Los Angeles Valiant right now, but they have early point control. The fight has begun though, and Fade is the first casualty. Cut down by Remix, combining of course with Shaz. Will fall.
Well, look at this angle that Silk Thread can have. It's going to make it very difficult for Surefour to land any shots on him. And as I say that, the caster curse comes through. It's actually Bishu eating up a lot of those rockets with the defense matrix, and Surefour doing a nice job moving back from pretty much the stairs of the Valiant, where they have to come on to the point, all the way to that angle by the jump pad, where Silk Thread didn't expect it.
So let's get into the actual VOD. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be analyzing the Los Angeles Valiant playing against the Los Angeles Gladiators on the city center part of Oasis that I just tried to describe. Now, I wanted to give some initial thoughts on the team comps. So the LA Valiant are playing Pharmacy, which means that they most likely want to deny the enemy team the jump pad area. They may have predicted that the Gladiators will put Asher on Tracer instead of Surefour, putting him on McCree instead. The Tracer probably wants to take control of the Mega around the pet, in hopes that the Gladiators will contest that. Now, the worst thing that could happen is that they can't even get to the Mega, because the Valiant's Pharah is keeping them in that little room. But other than that, both teams are running a default D.Va-Winston tank combo, which I think makes sense. Not just because of the map being played, but mainly because it's just a super strong combo still in the current meta. Now, I'm pretty sure that McCree on Surefour is also a sort of comfort pick for him. I don't think that they could say for certain that Valiant will run Pharah Tracer instead of putting Silk Thread on Genji, so I wouldn't read too much into that. In my opinion, comfort picks are incredibly important and trump going for a meta team comp in the majority of the cases. So putting him on McCree is honestly going to give them an advantage. Okay, so as expected, the Valiant do try to take control of the jump pad area, but the Gladiators are actually kind of outplaying them here. Instead of taking the fight around that area, which doesn't really favor them that much, whether Valiant was running Pharah Tracer or Genji Tracer, they decide to run the route opposite of the map. So they're going to go via this direction. Since Valiant isn't running a soldier, as expected in my opinion, with Silk Thread on the roster, the only reason the Valiant would take control of this jump pad area is to deny it to the Gladiators and to fight around that mega health pack, which is really, really strong for flankers. The Gladiators simply avoid that fight, which, as mentioned earlier, saves the Valiant with jump pad control they honestly can't really use. This forces the Valiant to rotate all the way to the point. Now, this puts the Gladiators in kind of a weird position, where they are all, cramped up between the two minis next to the street, and we'll see that in a second, whereas the Valiants have a Pharah that is controlling the entire rest of the map, including the point. This puts her in a great position, as she can repeatedly spam rockets into those smaller areas, quickly building up Valiant's Valkyrie. Now, just in terms of team comp alone, Valiant, in my opinion, has a huge advantage. The Gladiators did swap to a Mercy last second. However, since they are running Tracer McCree, their Mercy will generally farm less ult charge, as she has no Pharah to pocket, and she will be a lot more vulnerable to Valiant's Tracer, since she has no Pharah to Guardian Angel to. To be honest, this is, in my opinion, a pretty big weakness on the side of the Gladiators. City Center isn't a must-pick Pharah map like Gardens would be, but I do feel that the Asher and Surefour combo is putting them at a disadvantage for the aforementioned issues. Okay, so let's see all of this actually happen in action. Okay, so we can see the Gladiators kind of getting into this smaller area. And I'm going to pause right here. So right here we can see Valiant's advantage unfold. On the left side, we can see their tank combo, and we can also see the Pharmacy combo. Whereas Valiant's Tracer is attacking from this right side, and the Gladiators are kind of being trapped in this smaller area back here. Let's just keep this running for a bit longer.
They're going to be running Mercy Lucio, no Zenyatta on the side of the Valiant. The Valiant not touching the jump pad yet, as it does make a sound.
Okay, so this is I think a better angle. Okay, so this just beautifully shows Valiant's plan again. I think that the Gladiators should have contested the jump pad area. I know what they were trying to do considering their team comp, but the position that they are finding themselves in right now is pretty bad. So again, we can see Valiant's Tracer attacking from the right side. We can see the rest of her team attacking from this side, whereas the the Gladiators are just being completely trapped in this center area. And there's just they don't have any space, whereas the Valiant have control of this entire point area, and they really need to do something to actually get out of this bad position. Okay. Okay, so now this is important. It may not seem like it, but this Tracer 1v1 is actually crucial. By now the Gladiators must have realized what's going on and how they're being kind of trapped. But if the Gladiators can actually take down Valiant's Tracer, that would increase their chances of winning tremendously. Not just because of the first pick, but also because of how important that first pick actually is. What I want to point out is how Valiant's Tracer is taking this fight. He is fully aware of his win condition. Let me summarize the situation. So Gladiator's Tracer needs to make a move. She wants to get her team out of that small room to the left. She wants to get Valiant's Tracer down because she's applying pressure from that side angle. And she also knows that she has a huge advantage, the small health pack right next to her. On the other hand, Valiant's Tracer knows that his opponent has that advantage, which is why he plays close to the corner, applying enough pressure to keep the Gladiators where they are, but not going in so far that he might die to them. Okay? Okay. Him falling back to the point might have been playing it a bit too safe, which allowed Gladiator's Tracer to take a bit more space. The Valiant start getting pushed back to the point instead of keeping up pressure on the sides, which can allow the Gladiators to form a sort of ring around the point. The Valiant really want to be the ones squishing the Gladiators, not the other way around. Okay, so Asher moving to the right here, okay, that just gives him space of this entire area, which he really doesn't want. And you kind of need to think it like fluid, okay? So there was a lot of, since the Gladiators were all being pushed into this area, there's a lot of pressure building up. And now that Grim Reality is, he's kind of like a valve that just opened. So now the Gladiators can kind of start, you know, swarming out of that area, and all of the pressure that they were under is now just going away because they can take all of that space. Okay, and here Valiant's Tracer is just not really knowing what she's doing, to be honest. She's a little confused, and I think a little, she was hesitating a little bit too much, to be honest. So, alright. So this, I think, was a pretty big misplay on Valiant's side. Their Tracer dropping the pressure and their farmers clearly not applying enough put them in this weird situation. All of a sudden, they are being attacked by the Gladiator's Tracer from behind, the rest of the Gladiators from the front, and even their own Tracer finds herself on the middle of the point inside all that mess, which is not a position she wants to be in. Valiant's Tracer tried to move towards the street and attack the Gladiator's front line from behind, but with Gladiator's Tracer being behind him, he would get killed quickly, which forces him out of that situation. And, you know, in the end, the Valiant's Winston gets killed under all this pressure. Okay, so let's keep going. Okay. Valiant's Pharah is actually making a huge mistake in my eyes. She's exposing herself way too much. She should have kept an eye on the enemy McCree and moved to the right. Okay, closer to this middle section. Okay. She should have moved to the right so that that pillar in the middle would block her from the rest of the enemy team and also allow her to more quickly break line of sight. Okay, so she could move to the right, and this kind of pillar area as such would also move a little to the left, which would ideally cover her from the majority of the Gladiators. Okay. By the time he realized that a McCree was shooting at him, he was basically already dead. The fight was already won as soon as the Valiant's Winston died, but with their Pharah not securing a counterpick and their Tracer not getting pulse bombed quite in time, there is no way that they can win this fight at this point. The Gladiator's Mercy actually managed to farm more ult charge than his counterpart, which I think really shouldn't be the case. The Valiant, in my opinion, didn't capitalize on their superior positioning earlier after they realized that the Gladiators weren't taking control of the jump pad area. Instead of playing aggressively, they thought that they could just keep playing safe since they were in control of the point most likely. But with Gladiator's Tracer pushing Valiant's Tracer back to the point and the rest of the Gladiators pushing in from the other direction, Valiant was now in the middle of a pincer that really didn't need to happen.
It's going to make it very difficult for Surfboard to land any shots on him, and as I say that, the caster curse comes through.
Okay, so at this point, this is honestly just cleanup. Okay, so to kind of summarize what was going on here, okay, so in the end, the Valiant had superior positioning, the Gladiators were trapped inside of this area and they were being pressured from two sides. However, Grim Reality, Valiant's Tracer, was playing too passively against the Gladiator's Tracer, which made him go back to the point, which alleviated a lot of pressure from the Gladiators, so the Gladiators took their control here and started to kind of, you know, circle around the Valiant, who were trapped and being attacked from all sides. And, you know, Sig Threat, Valiant's Pharah, couldn't really secure a counterpick because he was playing way too far out in the open. Okay, so let's talk a bit about Kariv's res here. It's Valiant's Mercy resing their Pharah. I honestly have no idea what this res was for. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and just say that it was kind of dumb. Maybe they thought that Valiant's Pharah could make it out alive and build her ultimate while the rest of her team regroups, but he died on the middle of the point, which really made that play too risky in my eyes. Okay.
Or Silkthread didn't expect it.
What a big fight for the Gladiators. Look at these ultimates that are coming online. There's a Transcendence and a Valkyrie already. Very, very fast. And it's almost as if there was a tacit understanding from the perspective of the Gladiators, knowing that the Valiant would likely have pole position, would have better control of that space because they were faster with the Lucio in their lineup. So the Gladiators turtle together, ironically enough, and they come back out with extra damage because they've got the Zenyatta.
The Silkthread falling right at the beginning. That's going to force Karib to use his rest, but it's Grim Reality with a Pulse Bomb onto Surefour, and that's going to force the Valkyrie to come out from Big Goose. It's going to bring Surefour back into the fight, but a lot of kills going in favor of the Valiant. They're going to use their own Valkyrie as well here to keep everybody healed up on the point.
Asher's going to be finding himself in a solitary position in just a moment. Verbo boops him back as he gets close enough to smell him, and now he's going to be looking for Grim Reality again, trying to jump out of the way. A couple blinks here and there, and Asher is finding himself in a little bit of a protracted engagement. Not where Tracer wants to be, by the way. She'd like to be in and out quickly, but the rest of the Gladiators will soon return to the point. It's been a long fight, but this only benefits the Gladiators here. They're stalling it out. They're at 50% already. The Valiant have to clean them off properly and take control.
Without a doubt, I mean, Asher can still just kind of dart around on the point here. It goes to about an extra like 12-13% that the Gladiators get out of that stall.
Okay, let's go ahead a little. Okay, there we go. So, ult economy is pretty important. And at this point in time, the Gladiators have a huge lead. The Valiant have two options here. They can either try to dry push, baiting out Gladiators' ultimates while farming their own, or they can try to farm their ultimates, engaging the Gladiators in a huge fight with both teams having both of their ultimates. I think which play is smarter really depends on what Valiant's Tracer can do with her Pulse Bomb. Gladiators' McCree, having his high noon up, puts an insane amount of pressure on the Valiant's Pharah, and since the Valiants don't really have any open area to engage from, whereas the Gladiators have control of the point and everything around it. It's really up to Valiant's Tracer to try and take Gladiators' McCree out of the fight. This won't be a long-lasting solution, because Gladiators' Mercy would most likely just res it, but it can buy them a lot of time and space to follow up that pick with a full engage. The Valiants don't really have any huge ultimates like Dragon Blade or Tactical Visor, which means that the Gladiators' Transcendence will only be of limited use.
These ultimates that are coming online, there's a Transcendence and a Valkyrie already. Very, very fast. And it's almost as if there was a tacit understanding from the perspective of the Gladiators, knowing that the Valiant...
Okay. I think it's interesting to point out here that the Gladiators don't put their backline combo on the high ground, and their backline combo being the Mercy, Zenyatta, and McCree. Now, there could be multiple reasons for this. Either A, they anticipate Valiant's Pharah to just concussive blast them down, splitting them up, and putting someone out of position for a free pick. B, they didn't have enough time. The fight lasted relatively long, which means that repositioning might waste time, but I feel that's unlikely. They probably could have made it. Or C, I'm just overthinking this and they just forgot about it or didn't care enough. Okay, so in my eyes, theoretically, it could have been a good idea to put these three up on the high ground, especially since Big Goose, the Gladiators' Mercy, doesn't really have a Pharah, which makes this position very, very diveable. Okay.
Would likely have pole position, would have better control of that space because they were faster with the...
Okay, one very important thing to notice here that some people probably didn't notice is that Valiant's Tracer survived the last team fight, okay, and she is right here, okay. Now, this was incredibly smart, as she is already set up behind the Gladiators, ready to pincer them together as the rest of her team engages, ideally getting a Pulse Bomb stick. this next team fight is going to be extremely interesting, because the Gladiators definitely have the ult advantage. However, the Valiants have the positional advantage, since, you know, we have a Tracer attacking from this direction, and the rest of our team is starting to attack from this direction, and just applying a lot of pressure on the point. So this is like the first fight after Grim Reality lost the pressure because he wasn't being aggressive enough on Asher, and it flips that around. So it's going to be very interesting to see. Okay. Okay. I need to point out Surefour's positioning here. This position, in theory, is actually phenomenal, because he's basically untouchable from the high ground and jump pad area. However, in this spot, he is extremely vulnerable to Valiant's Tracer. Okay, so to clarify this again, this building in the middle makes it so that he's completely, you know, unattackable from this high ground. But as I've just showcased, Valiant's Tracer is still in that area to the right. Okay, and that means that he's basically in the middle of the Valiants, essentially, where he needs to worry about the pressure coming in from the front and Valiant's Tracer attacking him from behind. Okay, well, that didn't take long. Valiant's Tracer was lurking and waiting for just that opportunity. I feel like he was lacking confidence, though. Not just in the last fight, where he was falling back from the fight against the Gladiator's Tracer, but also here, where, in my opinion, he jumped in a little too late. Gladiator's McCree Surefour probably started to realize that his position might be a bit too open, which forced him to fall back. He couldn't really walk forwards towards his team, because that would get him shot from behind and from the front, so walking backwards puts him into a direct fight with Valiant's Tracer. There are two reasons why playing aggressively here is extremely risky. Valiant's Silk Thread switched from Pharah to Genji. He's probably more comfortable on Genji, and retaking this point as Pharah is incredibly difficult for, you know, the reasons I mentioned earlier, about there just not being enough space to work with. So that swap was definitely the right call. But with him already dying to Gladiator's Winston, getting the pick on Gladiator's McCree wouldn't really have as big of an impact, and his team simply doesn't have the follow-up strength that they need, especially after throwing away all that Pharah ult charge, since he swapped. And secondly, the only way that Valiant's Tracer is going to kill this McCree is via her Pulse Bomb, as it is incredibly unlikely she'll be able to burst through Mercy's healing beam. This adds another handicap to him. And not just that, getting this kill would probably just result in the Gladiators picking him right back up using Mercy. To be fair, there is a high chance that Gladiator's Mercy would have to use Valkyrie for it, as a manual casted res would probably end with her getting one clipped, and trading a Pulse Bomb for a Valkyrie can definitely be worth it. However, the risk is pretty high. But they actually managed to do it. Okay, so again, in summary, since Silk Thread switched from Pharah to the Genji, and, you know, losing out of that all of that ult charge, that was kind of, you know, a good swap. But Grim Reality really knew that, you know, he had to get this one pick, and he was hesitating, which I personally don't like. I think he could have, you know, kind of gone in a little bit earlier instead of allowing Surefour, Gladiator's McCree, to kind of start falling back, which gives him this one view of the entire team of the Valiant instead of standing over here being attacked from two fronts. Okay. So Valiant's Tracer finally gets his confidence and decides to go for the Pulse Bomb. Arguably super messy, but it did the job. Their Mercy also popped Valk, going for the res on Valiant's Genji, putting them back at 6. Now that the Gladiators are at a numbers disadvantage, they have to use their ultimates to retake all of this. But look at what happened to the positions. During this play, the Gladiators were pushed off from the point. Look at how far back Gladiator's McCree Surefour died here. This is going to give Valiant a lot of space. In the end, Valiant probably realized that while this play was extremely risky, it is the only way that they can retake the point without giving off too many capture points to the Gladiators. Super high risk, but the fact that he actually got the Pulse Bomb kill is incredibly rewarding for him. Okay. So at this point, all of this is just clean up. This literally, I mean, it kind of matters, but the Gladiators are just like all fighting, you know, in this area in the back here where Asher is standing right now, whereas the Valiant have control of this entire point. So at this point, the fight is over, and this is just, as I said, this is just cleanup, not too important. Yeah, he's trying to get some ult charge, again, squeezing every single percentage out of it, but not really going to do much. Okay, so this fight was incredibly chaotic, what I just showed you, this entire cleanup period, okay? But let me give you a summary. Gladiators and Yatta used his Transcendence way too late. He could have saved multiple people with it, which would drastically slow down Valiant's aggressive push and allow them to punish Valiant despite their bad position. However, him using it so late gives Valiant enough time to frag out. I also want to give a small piece of advice for Tracer here, since this is a great example. With Tracer's recall, it really isn't about how much HP you regenerate, it's more about how much HP you end up with. So, for example, recalling from 90 HP to 150 HP is much better than recalling from 30 HP to 100 HP, because you still would need a health pack to not be in one-shot range. Okay, so yes, overall this fight was just Gladiators being in a very, very bad position. Shaz was using his Transcendence way too late. You know, by that time it was already over. So yes, the Gladiators could have played this better. You know, ideally they wouldn't have wasted the Transcendence on that one. But that's going to bite them in the butt a little later.
In and out quickly, but the rest of the Gladiators will soon return to the point. It's been a long fight, but this only benefits the Gladiators here. They're stalling it out. They're at 50% already.
Okay, so at this point what the commentators are saying is true. All the Gladiators want here is to just get as much capture percentage as they can. Ideally, they want to get it to around 90 to 95%, if not 99%, to ensure that if they retake the point, they won't have to fight another fight. The reason this is important is that the knowledge of the next fight being the last fight is incredibly important. If they plan on retaking the point at 70% capture rate, they can't just throw all their ultimates at the retake itself, because then they will have to fight another fight without any ults, causing a 99 to 100 lose for them most likely. If, however, they know that a retake would be the last fight, then they can just stack all of their ultimates to ensure that they can retake, instead of having to worry about their ult economy in the long run. Not getting 99% is kind of like going to Las Vegas on a Sunday. It's going to suck because you know that you have to, do work the next day, even though you're kind of in a shit spot. Okay, let's keep this going.
The Valiant have to clean them off properly and take control.
Without doubt, I mean, Asher can still just kind of dart around on the point here. It goes to about an extra like 12-13% that the Gladiators get.
They get it around 60%. Okay, it's actually decent. It's not that great, but it's okay.
So the Valiant also had to invest a decent amount of ults into Grim Reality already with another Pulse Bomb. Silk Thread's going to have a Dragon Blade here. Both support ults used from the Gladiators, so to stall that out. So coming into the next fight, we'll see if Asher can make a play with a Pulse Bomb and maybe get Verbo to use that Sound Barrier to get one of the support ults out. Then you come back in that next fight after, and you probably are getting closer to both your support ults again, would be the Gladiators.
Gladiators on the point. Remix out in front. Silk Thread again, searching for that target in the back lines. He's going to opt to go around here. Fate gets taken down early by a Pulse Bomb. No Resurrect for him or Grim Reality at this stage. Kareev now being pressured down. Maybe he just couldn't get in position to actually get that Resurrect. Good work by the Gladiators here, making a very dangerous endeavor. And Silk Thread is flashed as soon as he gets to the back line. Shaz with the cheeky kill still. Give this Zenyatta some glory.
Verbo uses the Sound Barrier and they go to it. Pulse Bomb. Silk Thread's going to have a Dragon Blade here. Both support ults.
Okay, now it gets exciting again. Right here, we can see something interesting happen. Since the Valiants know that the Gladiators aren't playing a Pharah, and quite frankly can't afford to swap to a Pharah considering their roster and current ult status, they can take this high ground area with no problems whatsoever. The reason they are taking this area is mainly that they want to protect their Mercy. Up here, it's going to be much harder for Gladiator's Tracer to jump on her. So this is a great example of taking high ground not to boost your offensive capability, but to cripple the enemy's effectiveness. The Gladiators, however, can make a smart move here. Knowing the Valiant aren't up here for any offensive gain, but to provide safety to their Mercy, they can play the opposite side of the point. This eventually forces the Valiant to drop down from the point, as they can't just let the Gladiators capture it for free. Without Valkyrie, Mercy wouldn't be able to maintain her positioning on the high ground without losing out on effectiveness, since she can't really heal, people through walls. And since you're always in a permanent state of risk in Overwatch, being in a position with no rewards is always detrimental. I'm pretty confident the Valiant know about this. Their best bet would probably be to let the Gladiators either try and contest the jump head, which would probably result in them getting slaughtered, or to go to the opposite side of the point, which would allow the Valiant to pincer them from both sides with ease. Okay? So, let's keep this running. It's really interesting how Grim Reality positions himself on the left there. Okay, again, this is the kind of pincer movement that they're trying to go for. Okay, Slickthread playing smart as well, covering that flank. Okay, there we go. So, now it gets interesting. The Valiant's weakness has been exposed. The Valiants have absolutely no long-range damage, which means that while they still benefit from the defensive advantage of that high ground, they are going to be absolutely useless in terms of damage unless they split up. This allows the Gladiators to start capturing the point without putting themselves in a bad position. They can simply put someone like their Tracer on the point to pressure it, while the rest of the team stays out in the open to the side of the point, looking straight into the Valiant, knowing that they can't do anything without any range damage. The Gladiators not hiding behind the pillar in the center of the point is irrelevant, because there is no long-range damage to be scared of. This allows them to maintain relatively good positioning instead of going into the death trap behind the point. The Valiant realized that they aren't really doing this, and that the Gladiators don't get baited that easily, because, both because they didn't try to contest the high ground, and because they weren't completely committing to the point. This forces the Valiant to overrun the Gladiators before they take too much space right at that gate. They use their ultimates to try and push back the Gladiators before they get the space that they need. If Gladiators McCree, for example, would manage to get out into the open, he could be quite devastating with High Noon, but by acting early and playing with confidence, they are actually putting themselves into a favorable position. They shouldn't forget, however, that the jump distance to engage is quite long and that the Gladiators aren't defenseless, so this fight is actually closer than someone might think. Okay. So Slickthread again is looking for that angle on the side. Again, very smart, and they're taking that fight in that area. Okay. There we go. So, considering the fact that they had only captured around 30% of the point, Valiant's Genji not using his Dragon Blade was a huge mistake. Maybe he was expecting the Gladiators and Yatta to have trans, but considering how incredibly late he used it in the last fight, and how little he has done so far during the regrouping stage, it was to be expected that he wouldn't have this yet. Maybe Valiant's ult tracker, most likely the Lucio, didn't communicate that clearly, and Valiant's Genji just assumed that he would have it. Since the Gladiators could take the space they need and weren't being pushed back all the way due to the lack of pressure by the missing Dragon Blade, they actually managed to retake after getting their first picks. LA Gladiators Zenyatta player Shaz is actually doing a lot this game, and the effectiveness of Zenyatta in the preseason has been pretty insane. Sleepy of the San Francisco Shock has also been super strong, as were all the other Zenyatta players. Alright, let's keep this running. Although at this point the fight is basically over. The Valiant didn't use Blade because they, probably didn't know that Shaz has Transcendence for some reason, so unlucky.
Gage and Fate jumps right in, gets a pulse bomb right in his face. So although we talked about the Gladiators not having a ton of ults there, it was Asher making the difference with a big pulse bomb. It's going to be Silk Thread reflecting Surefour's Deadeye right back in his face, but Kareem does fall though, so you take that Mercy out. You're going to get the res from Big Goose, bringing Surefour right back in. It seems like Shaz has actually used the Transcendence here. The Gladiators going to get pretty aggressive.
The Gladiators know that they can stall the point for quite a long time, but maybe they get a little bit too big for their boots there. It's the D-suit on Bishu and Remix and Goose are both taken down. Silk Thread now going to take advantage of this, at least try and pressure onto Surefour. The Valiant take the point back, but don't get ahead of yourselves, ladies and
gentlemen. Okay. So, At this point, you can see a stark contrast to the way the Gladiators position themselves now compared to how they positioned themselves earlier when they were taking the point for the first time. They were playing much further back, especially Gladiators McCree when, he was standing on the opposite side of the high ground to avoid that angle. Okay. Now, the main reason for this is most likely time. They are trying to buy as much time as possible. I can't say for sure that they knew that Valiant's Genji not using his Dragon Blade last fight was one of the main reasons they won. What they did know, however, is that the last fight was too easy, which usually means that the next fight will become a lot harder, and looking at Valiant's ult economy, that may very well be the case. So the Gladiators try to go for an early pick by pushing up, hopefully extending the amount of time the Valiant require for a regroup and thus giving them enough time to farm their remaining ults. Worst case, they'll get the point to 99% because of their stall. Best case, they win the game. Unlucky. Getting Valiant's Mercy was definitely worth it, but dying here is bad. Really bad. Normally the trade of Mercies versus McCree is amazing, but if the McCree can't get rezzed, you don't really get as much out of it. So now the Valiant have this window of opportunity to engage in a 5 versus 5 while still having a slight ult advantage. With their Mercy respawning and rejoining a lot sooner than Gladiators McCree will. The play was definitely good, but the execution had to be better, sadly. Happens to the best of us, and that's okay.
With a big pulse bomb, it's going to be Silk Thread reflecting Surefour's Deadeye right back in his face, but Kareem does fall though, so you take that Mercy out, you're going to get the res from Big Goose.
Okay. Now, why did the Valiant not push in aggressively here? I feel pretty confident that it's them assuming Valiant's Mercy as Valkyrie. If she had Valkyrie, McCree dying out of position wouldn't really have been a problem. There are 3 main reasons to use Valkyrie. Obviously, there are some other cases, but these are the most frequent ones. Either A, using Valkyrie's mobility to escape, B, to res someone who you couldn't res otherwise because he was out of position and the cast time would kill you, or C, to res someone when your resurrect is on cooldown. The Valiants were scared of case B most likely, and decided to back off to instead wait for their own Mercy to respawn, which was a smart choice considering that it was nigh impossible for them to predict that the Gladiator's Mercy didn't have her Valk up quite yet. You can also see how the Gladiator's D.Va tries to body block the resurrection and matrix it, once again showing that they were well aware this play was super risky. This was just a slight misplay from both teams, which is to be expected considering the unoptimized rosters and the fact that these are preseason matches. Okay, so this once again shows the Gladiator's strategy. With their McCree pushing up earlier to buy time, they are now putting their tanks in the front line, letting them push in by a lot. This allows their Zenyatta and McCree to take up even more space. This play is obviously kind of risky, because they are playing so close to the spawn, but considering that the Valiant have only captured 42% so far, giving them a cushion to fall on, and the fact that their Tracer and Mercy basically have their ultimate, playing to win here is a smart choice. They should, however, take the last fight further back. Right here, they are taking a fair fight out in the open, which is honestly not really something they have to do. They already have captured enough of the point, they should fall back, which would force the Valiant to squeeze themselves back through the arch area onto the point, giving the Gladiators superior positioning. How much longer they can stall this mainly depends on whether their Tracer is going to land a stick, but considering that Valiant's D.Va already lost her mech, and Winston can be risky to stick because the follow-up damage isn't guaranteed, it's going to be hard for the Gladiators to pressure for much longer. And this is what happens when they decide to push their luck. Okay, so ideally the Gladiators would have realized that this choke here is kind of, annoying, so they could have positioned themselves here, forcing the Valiant to all funnel through the choke, getting destroyed by the Gladiators. Okay, but they really overstayed their welcome. and since they were standing in the middle of the street, they had absolutely nowhere to run here. Gladiators losing their frontline is understandable, but their Mercy really should not have died to this ult. Maybe she didn't have anyone to Guardian Angel to, or she simply couldn't get out of line of sight in time. Considering that the Gladiators D.Va lost her mech, Mercy would not have been able to restore the even numbers on both teams, as you can't res D.Va's mech. Instead of seeing this risk, the Gladiators decide to stay pushed up instead of falling back to the point, forcing the Valiant into close quarters. The main problem for the Gladiators is that the Valiant don't really need to use many more ultimates for this retake, considering that they have the Mercy advantage, especially since their Mercy is at 90% ult charge. This means that the Valiant are effectively in an 8v4, and you don't really need ults to win that. This will allow them to keep the Dragon Blade off their Genji to make up for all that lost capture percentage. So let's keep this running. So at this point, this is just cleanup. Not too much to think about, really.
The Gladiators are close to finishing the round, and these fights can stall for quite some time.
It's going to be both teams with Valkyrie, though, so this fight is going to last for, what seems like an eternity, right? Mercy on both sides can get a double res. Silk Thread does have his Dragon Blade. Low here.
This last fight for the Valiant is going to be Angels and Airwaves. Kareev and Verbo, of course. We want to see if we can get that sound barrier online to assist with some of those supportive ultimates. He does have an opportunity to get there, but that's the Valkyrie coming out from Kareev now. Vidfuse is holding his for the time being. Oh, it's going to be a Dragon Blade. Even if he gets flashed immediately, Silk Thread almost stopped short of his goal. He manages to come to and try and continue his quest. The crusade into the back line for Silk Thread has paid off in numbers. And the Valiant win another fight, prolonging their hold over this point. And putting the Gladiators close to finishing the round, and these fights can stall for quite some time.
It's going to be both teams with
Okay.
Valkyrie, though, so this fight is going to last.
The Valiant's positioning here is really good. Putting their main tank combo in the center of the point will allow them to easily jump on the Gladiators. Since they know that the Gladiators don't really have the means to take the high ground due to the McCree lacking range and verticality, and the high ground won't really be the best way to retake the point anyways, because they'll have to drop down to capture it, they are putting themselves right here where they can jump both main entrances to the front area while putting their Genji on the side so he can pincer the Gladiators as they engage. Okay, so this positioning, very, very smart. Okay, we can also see our Grim Reality, the Valiant's Tracer is also positioning him on the left, just to give them that extra angle, okay? This is actually a play that I think was a bit odd. The Valiant's D.Va decided to boost over to the high ground, while their Mercy wasn't on the high ground above the point, which forced her to use Valkyrie to save herself. They are getting super greedy. They want to play far back to waste the Gladiators' time and force them to take the engage. But considering that the Gladiators have two targets that are easily diveable, Zenyatta and McCree, I think playing aggressively earlier would have been the correct play. This would ideally give them a one-team fight. The momentum of that one-team fight could then have been carried over to the second one to close out the map. Instead, they want to try and make all of this just one team fight. I can get the idea behind that, but I feel like they should have had more confidence and just took two fights. Now, the main reasoning as to why the Valiant could have been hesitant is the Gladiators' defensive ults, Valkyrie and Transcendence. Maybe they weren't aware that they didn't have Transcendence, which one again comes down to them potentially not properly tracking and communicating ults, or they were scared of the Valkyrie negating their dive. I don't think it's that though, since that would force the Gladiators to pop Valkyrie early, still giving them a net advantage. So I'm pretty confident that they wanted to avoid the trans fight here.
With some of those supportive ultimates, he does have an opportunity to get there, but that's the Valkyrie coming out from Kareev now. Vidfuse is holding his for the time being. Oh, it's going to be a Dragon Blade. Even if he gets flashed immediately, Silk Thread almost stopped short of his goal. He manages to come to and try and continue his quest. The crusade into the back line for Silk.
Okay. They did eventually go for the engage, although there was definitely some hesitation. Valiant's Genji was most likely waiting for his frontline to engage before he uses Blade, so he won't get immediately focused down. In the end, it turned out perfectly. he manages to jump into the split Gladiators, and despite some poor mechanical execution on the Dragon Blade, they manage to close out the fight. They are, however, in a really bad situation now. Having used Blade and Valkyrie, the Valiant are looking pretty poor in terms of ultimates. Since the Gladiators' Mercy didn't have to pop Valkyrie, as the fight was over anyway, they will enter the next fight with 2 defensive ultimates. This is going to make a retake incredibly hard. The big boy play here would be Valiant's Tracer landing a stick on the Gladiators' Mercy. That play would immediately win them the next fight. But that is super difficult to do, and I wouldn't really count on that. The main problem is that the Valiant's D.Va doesn't have her ultimate yet. Not only would her self-destruct do really well against the Mercy, especially when she is using Valkyrie, since a Valking Mercy prefers to fly as high up as possible, it would also completely negate a potential Transcendence by the Gladiators. The best plan for the Valiants is probably to take the next fight rather slowly, farming up their ultimates and just getting to 99%. Okay.
Thread has paid off in numbers. The Valiant win another fight, prolonging their hold over this point and putting the Gladiators in a position they have to break through.
The Gladiators have a Primal Rage and they have Valkyrie, so they have a lot of stall potential on this point. Bishu's getting very close to his self-destruct, so they have a lot of ultimates where they can just burn time on the point. They have to get back to it though, as it's going to be 92% and counting for the Valiant as Remix jumps into the point, so it will be contested. They have that Valkyrie, they're going to use it right now. Maybe Shaz can build his way up towards a Transcendence here, as Verbo is getting very close to another sound barrier here as well. So let's see how these ults stack on top of each other.
Oh, Asher very low. He's forced to back away. He gets out alive and Grim gets baited into it. Shawfall was hiding, waiting in the shadows for his chance for the backstab, and he's found it. Grim now would love to be able to get a res at this stage, and it comes from Kareev. So his mistake, his folly is erased, and he's back in the fight again. LA Valiant still in control of the point, and now we're into overtime, and Silk Thread's looking for a backstab again. Who's he gonna be going for? There's a Transcendence out to him. He needs to be a little bit careful. Shawfall pressured down, had the Orb of Harmony, flash reflected, but it looks like Silk Thread wasn't able to get him with it. Nice work with the Shurikens. Big Goose down. There's a swift strike through the Mercy, and things are looking grim for the Gladiators, but Asher getting a quick double might be able to turn this around. It's going to be Grim on the point, and Asher, both Traces are still doing work on either side. Kareev is low. Remix is trying to chase him down, and he manages just to get him with the final licking tendrils of the Tesla gun. It's 97 Gladiators who are taking the point back. Grim now has to throw himself into this just to stall it out. He's the only player for his team, but he's now going to be joined here by Envy on the point. They're keeping safe. There's no need to fight right now. They lack the numbers, Matt.
It's going to be Sureforce switching over to Reaper, getting onto the point as well. You're going to see Shaz go over to 76, so a lot of firepower coming out here for the Gladiators. Silk Thread, though, with the Dragon Blade, he's able to get one. The res comes in on a fade, so you bring your Winston back in. But Bishu deals quickly with Silk Thread as the point still contested, 99 to 99.
Three down for the Valiant. They're lacking numbers, and now Gladiators are just going to start to exercise their dominance. They've got a lot of players here on the point, and Asher finishes the in a position. They have to break through.
The Gladiators have a Primal Rage and they have Valkyrie, so they have a lot of stall potential on this point. Bishu's getting very close to his self-destruct, so they have a lot of ultimates where they can just burn time on the point. They have to get back to it.
The commentators are saying here is actually pretty spot on, to be honest. Now, once again, I'd like to point out the way the Valiants position themselves here. Since they are in it to just stall for as long as possible, they don't position themselves directly above the point, but instead took control of the jump pad area. This allows them to avoid direct confrontation, and thus stall until they ideally get their ultimates to beat the Gladiators in a pretty even fight in terms of ult economy. The way that Valiant's flankers position themselves is also good, with Tracers scouting out when the Gladiators are starting to push in. They are very much aware of the fact that the Gladiators are under a lot of pressure, considering that they need to touch the point, and they are also aware of the Gladiators being scared of stacking together, as that would make them super vulnerable to Valiant's Winston or Pulse Bomb. So Valiant's flankers are waiting for the front line to push in so they can jump on the back line and hopefully get that Mercy pick we talked about earlier, which would basically give them the instant win. The Gladiators are actually making a mistake here, at least from my perspective. It doesn't look like they were really aware of the Valiant's flank positioning. The reason I'm saying that is that the Gladiators' backline decide to walk towards the point via the left gate instead of the right one, which would be much farther away from the high ground, allowing them safer passage. Now this is one of those gambling situations, where it really is like rock, paper, scissors. If the Valiant's flankers position themselves on the opposite side of the high ground, then the move the Gladiators made here would have been good. On the other hand, since the Valiants are positioning themselves on the high ground side of the map, the Gladiators' positioning is incredibly risky. Earlier, you could even see the Valiant's front line hiding around the wall, which really showcases their plan. Okay. This was a huge mistake by the Valiant's Tracer. She decided to walk to the point way too early, before the fight has even started. With flankers, you really want to try and not put yourself in the middle of a fight, especially not before your own tanks have engaged. You usually want to walk along the edges of the fight, picking off enemies that are split off from the team. Not only this, but she didn't seem fully aware of her win condition. If she would have waited just a few seconds longer, she would have seen the Gladiators' backline walk out, try to go for a stick, and secure the entire point right there and then. Okay, now the Valiant are in a really bad position. As the Gladiators' Mercy got to pop her Valkyrie, she is flying up in the air, making her basically untouchable by the entirety of Valiant's team comp. And as the Gladiators' Zenyatta is going to quickly farm up his Transcendence, this fight is going to be a lot harder than it had to be for the Valiant. Valiant's Tracer missed the opportunity, and the best target for him to stick now would be Gladiator's McCree. He can't really stick their D.Va, because she'll just use her ultimate and get the mech back most likely, and the Winston has his primal range, so he wouldn't die to it. I doubt that he was aware of the Gladiator's Zenyatta not having his trans yet, so sticking him would have also been a gamble, since he could have just popped to survive it. And this is Valiant's Tracer's poor positioning going into full effect. Okay. Standing in the middle of the point made her vulnerable from basically all sides, allowing even a McCree, who is rotating and trying to again go for a slight pincer movement, to get her from behind. This pick alone is really not that great. However, the Valiant still have a res. In this current situation, the Valiant really need to just outperform the Gladiators in order to win, as the odds are definitely stacked against them in terms of ultimates and positioning. Okay. I think it's really great how the Valiant's Genji sees 3 targets, but realizes that none of them are really killable by himself, so he decides to back off in order to stop the bleeding of the Valiant's Tracer just dying, rejoining with his front line and finding the target they are focusing so he can secure a kill. This kind of screw it mentality is really important, being able to see situations and just realizing that they are not worth your time and you should go look for better opportunities somewhere else.
For his chance for the backstab and he's found it. Grim now would love to be able to get a res at this stage, and it comes from Kareev, so his mistake, his folly is erased.
Okay. This team fight is similar to the ones before, in that one team, in this case the Valiant, possessed the advantage in terms of positioning, whereas the other team, in this case the Gladiators, have a huge ultimate advantage. Now the Gladiator's Zenyatta has his Transcendence, which makes it even harder for the Valiant to actually secure any kills, and the Valiant's Winston can only stall for so long using Primal Rage. He did stall long enough to actually give the Valiant's D.Va her self-destruct, which is huge. Considering that the Gladiator's Valk is running out, the Valiant now possess 2 ultimates that can completely negate the Gladiator's Transcendence, and this is their ticket to actually win this, despite the Gladiators basically having twice as many ultimates. Yeah, this is going to be hype. I'm looking forward to this one. Okay, let me go back a little, because this needs to actually be frame perfect. Maybe a little further. Okay, let me try that again. Okay, perfect. So, it's really beautiful to see a play come together like this. As soon as the Gladiators used Transcendence, Valiant's D.Va realized that this is where the Gladiators will gain this false sense of security, clumping up right out in the open like here. With Valiant's Genji pushing in from behind, the Gladiators don't really have anywhere to go and are pretty exposed to the self-destruct. They did manage to kill the Valiant's Winston, which was probably a misplay on his part. However, there is a low chance that this was actually his plan, that he was trying to act as bait, putting the Gladiators into even more feelings of security. I am probably reading too much into it, but if that was their actual plan, I am super impressed. Okay. And then a huge mistake happens. He simply misaimed his self-destruct and fired it off too late. The Gladiators did not get into a safe position in time, since they're chilling in that corner now, and had the self-destruct been aimed just a little better, this would have resulted in an easy double, if not triple kill. However, this does put the Gladiators into an incredibly bad position. Not only are they super squished together, they also can't escape much further, allowing them to walk off even more from their front line. This makes them incredibly easy targets for the Valiant's flanker combo. Some may think that the Valiant's Genji was making a wrong play focusing the Gladiator's McCree here, considering that he was both Harmony Orbed and Mercy Pocketed. However, he really wanted to keep pushing this because he knew how out of position they were, and the Valiant's Tracer and Genji actually show some great synergy here, taking their entire backline down within a few seconds.
Careful, Surefall pressure down, had the orb of harmony, flash reflected, but it looks like Silk Thread wasn't able to get him with it. Nice work with
Probably pretty happy about getting those frags and thinking that he could simply clean up the rest of the fight, the Valiant's Genji actually decides to go to the point, not realizing that his HP is basically non-existent. He should have just taken the Mega next to the jump pad, to be honest. Unlucky. Even some of the best forget to look at their health sometimes, but that's okay. With his death, the Valiant do lose out on a lot of their killing potential, which makes the rest of the fight a lot harder, and the Gladiator's Tracer has all the space she needs around the point now.
the Shurikens, big goose down. There's a swift strike through the Mercy, and things are looking grim for the Gladiators, but Asher getting a quick double might be able to turn this around. It's going to be Grim on the point, and Asher, both Tracers are still doing work on either side. Kareev is low, Remix is trying to chase him down, and he manages just to get him with the final licking tendrils of the Tesla gun. At 97, Gladiators are taking the point back. Grim now.
Okay, this shows how important it is that both flankers need to be alive when running a Tracer Genji combo. The Valiant's Tracer is simply lacking the damage to confirm any kills, which wouldn't have been a problem if he had a Genji backing him up. Valiant's Genji was also incredibly close to his Dragon Blade, which would have once again helped with closing this fight out.
Throw himself into this just to stall it out. He's the only player for his team, but he's now going to be joined here by Envy on the point. They're keeping safe. There's no need to fight right now.
He's going for a flank. Okay. At this point, they really just want to stall. They know that the Gladiators don't have the ultimates, while they do, so all they need is some time for everyone to respawn and close this out. It's also interesting to see how the Gladiators have basically completely changed their team comp at this point in time. This makes sense, because they don't really have the time to farm up more ultimates, so they pick characters like Soldier and Reaper, whose strength lies in their main kit and primary fire instead of their ults, and a Lucio who can bring those two characters back from spawn straight to the fight. Another reason why the Soldier and Reaper are a good pick is because of their self-sustainability. Since they are playing a solo support comp now, with barely any healing since they mainly needed the Lucio for the speed boost out of spawn, they really need to be able to fight this fight without relying on a second healer.
It's going to be Surefall switching over to Reaper, getting onto the point as well. You're going to see Shaz go over to 76, so a lot of firepower coming out here for the Gladiators. Silk Thread, though, with the Dragon Blade.
This was actually really well executed. He just couldn't do much more there, to be honest. It was still a nice blade. Okay. The Gladiators plan for the short term, so them losing their Soldier is a big blow. This is a war of attrition, which heavily favors the Valiant as they still have their Mercy, who is also very close to Valkyrie. So at this point, the win is basically guaranteed for the Valiant as long as the Mercy stays alive.
Bishu deals quickly with Silk Thread as the point still contested 99 to 99.
Three down for the Valiant. They're lacking numbers, and now Gladiators are just going to start to exercise.
which she doesn't. So the Valiant lose their main advantage. This I think is incredibly interesting. The Valiant could have avoided this entire advantage had they just killed the enemy supports earlier when they were at 99%, but they failed to do that. So now the Gladiators come around and show them how it's done, taking down Valiant's Mercy player Karith and securing the win. This entire game was such a roller coaster, it's insane, and the fights were insanely close. However, both teams made major mistakes that should have been avoided.